In this video, I'll be talking about volume spacers, what they are, how they work, and when you should add or remove them from your fork or shock. Volume spacers, also known as tokens, are small pieces of plastic that you add or remove from your air suspension to change the way that suspension feels. The more volume spacers you have fitted, the more progressive your suspension will be, meaning it's harder to push that suspension right the way through its travel and bottom it out. On the other hand, the less volume spacers you have fitted, the more linear or less progressive your suspension will be, meaning it's easier to push that suspension right the way through its travel and bottom it out. Volume spacers come in various different shapes and sizes, and the ones you need will depend upon the make and model of the suspension that you have. Unfortunately, they are not universal. The way in which they fit also depends upon the make and model of the suspension. However, adding and removing volume spacers is a relatively simple process that can be done at home. Volume spacers work by changing the amount of available airspace inside your suspension. The more volume spacers you have fitted, the less available airspace there will be. And as you push your suspension through its travel, the air pressure inside there will build up at a much faster rate, giving that more progressive or ramped feeling, making it harder to push right the way through its travel and bottom it out. On the other hand, the less volume spacers you have fitted, the more available airspace there will be. And as you push that suspension through its travel, the air pressure inside there will build up at a much slower rate, giving that more linear or less progressive feeling, making it easier to push right the way through its travel and bottom it out.
If you're using more suspension travel than you'd like, things are a little soft, deeper into that travel, and you're bottoming out hard on a regular basis, then it may be worth adding a volume spacer or two. This will make things that bit more progressive, making it harder to push the bike right the way through its travel and bottom it out, and give the bike that bit more support deeper into its travel. However, if you're not using as much travel as you'd like, or things are a little harsh, deeper into the travel, then it may be worth removing a volume spacer or two. This will make things that bit more linear, giving the bike less support, deeper into its travel, and making it easier to push right the way through and bottom it out. Now, this isn't always the case, as things like air pressure, rebound and compression damping have a huge effect on your suspension's performance. So it is worth double checking those settings before you start adding or removing volume spacers. If you decide to add volume spacers, just make sure you don't go over the maximum number for your particular fork or shock. And if you decide to play around with those suspension settings, including adding or removing volume spacers, just make sure you do things one area at a time. That way you'll know if the change you've just made has or hasn't given you the feeling that you're after. Unfortunately, when it comes to volume spacers and suspension settings in general, there is not an exact number or formula that works for everybody. It is very much personal preference. Add some volume spacers, ride your bike, remove some volume spacers, ride your bike, play around with those settings one area at a time and find what works for you. So that will do it for this one. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe and I will see you in the next one.